It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is John Temple, President and CEO of Guideposts, a national nonprofit organization that promotes hope, faith, and prayer in people's lives. Prior to Guideposts, John served as the founder and chief of the Human Trafficking Response Unit at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York City. John worked to form the unit in recognition of the devastating impact that human trafficking has had on its victims and their families. John has lectured both within the U.S. and internationally on human trafficking for foreign delegations, members of law enforcement, the legal community, nonprofits, and other governmental agencies. He has been recognized for his anti-trafficking work as one of New York City's new abolitionists and is the recipient of the Thomas E. Dewey Medal for Outstanding Prosecutors. From 2012 to 16, John taught courses on human trafficking and constitutional law at Fordham University, and he graduated from the University of Rochester in 1998 and from Brooklyn Law School in 2003. John Temple, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks so much for having me, Brant. Appreciate it.
Wonderful to connect with you again today. We're recording this in a very hot northeastern midsummer day in June, but it hasn't always been this way. I know you're not too far by. I'm glad we've gotten beyond Memorial Day.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't remember a Memorial Day like that in a very long time. Yeah,
it was horrible.
40s and rain. That was not a good beach day. Yeah.
Well, people will be listening to this, I think, sometime in August and September. So hope everyone is out there having a wonderful summer, but sure. We're finally into it now. Well, John, you've had an amazing career. And as we spoke a couple of weeks ago, to going from a professorship to being a district attorney and then on to Guideposts has been a real interesting journey. And I'm so excited about kind of following that with you and understanding how you kind of made those various transitions. But we always kind of like to start with the early days. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a small town of Carmel, New York, which is about 50, 60 miles north of New York City. So back in the 80s, just far enough to be commutable, right. To people who would, kind of a bedroom community, but, sure. Really, just a nice small town to grow up in. And so, I grew up there with my parents and, right. Two sisters. And,
where were you in the lineup? Are you older, younger, in the middle?
Yeah, I'm the youngest, actually.
Youngest, okay.
Yeah. My sister thinks there's a lot to birth order. As the oldest, she feels very connected to her eldest status and thinks that I'm very much a youngest. So I'll leave that to you.
I identify with that. I have two older brothers, so I know exactly what she's talking about. What did mom and dad do?
So my mom is a school teacher by trade, and both she and my dad studied at the University of Illinois. Okay.
Did they grow up in the Midwest?
They did, yeah. Both grew up in Southern Illinois, and my mom got her teaching certificate in music education.
Oh, cool. Right.
And then my dad graduated University of Illinois and ultimately went to McCormick Seminary and became a Presbyterian pastor. Right. And then so came out Northeast basically took a church in Peekskill, New York, which brought the family here, and then they started having us.
So Christian household growing up, was that something that was an important part of your upbringing? Sunday school on Sundays. I grew up in the Presbyterian church as well, so I kind of know the routine. Was that present at the time, or did that come later in your life?
Oh, very, very much so.
Yeah.
We have a small Presbyterian church, but a very close knit one. And
Nice.
my mom, even still today, is the music director and was very involved in Sunday school and as a kid, actually a good friend of mine and I actually taught Sunday school, in high school, and
Cool.
so it's always been sort of part of the fabric of our lives. My father's at some point decided that he really ministry and being in the church wasn't where his calling really was. And he ultimately wound up going to Reader's Digest for a period, and then ultimately went to Guideposts.
The Guideposts,
which is ultimately where my connection
very interesting
started.
succession. So, we'll get to that in a moment, but we're going to cut some of the early years. So when did you come to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior?
It's one of these things where Jesus has always been part of my life, and I know. I kind of wish I had that moment in some ways, where people ask that question, when do you feel like you commit? But it was always just part of the fabric of our lives. And I think my family, our faith, and my parents' faith and my sister's faith, really came out in their acts and how we, interacted, how they lived their lives, the integrity they lived their life. That's where I saw their faith, and that's where I learned mine. And so I have a little different story in that way, but it's always been a part of me.
Awesome. Mom and Dad still with us? They are.
They're doing well and cool. Did well during the pandemic. And it was really they're still doing well. So we're thankful for that.
When you think back to some of those early years and, lessons from mom and dad, good or bad, what are some of the things that you remember about, their work and, how they lived their life and presented their faith?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest things for us as a family, my middle sister, Jenny, was born with cerebral palsy. And so that left her where she was not able to care for herself at all. She wasn't able to speak or walk. And so, as a family, I really witnessed Christ's love and God's love in their actions. At a time in the 70s where if you had a child who was born with that severe of disability, my parents were told you got to put her into an institution.
That's right.
And they said no, we're not going to do that. And wound up showing that love and care. And she passed a few years ago.
She did. Did she need care her whole life?
Her whole life, 46 years. My parents cared for her. Wow. And
what love and devotion that is. Huh?
Yeah. And when you see that, and it also just makes anything that you're going through at the moment, and as teenagers, and you think, geez, the world's coming to an end when this doesn't happen or that doesn't happen, and you look at her, and she was so special because she was one of the most joyful people I've ever met, and she couldn't communicate with words, but she communicated with her smile, with her eyes. And ultimately, if she could find the joy in life, and she did, and she brought it to everybody else, she really taught all of us a lesson. And my kids who got to know her, I think we're all more caring and compassionate people because of the joy she helped us see.
What a lesson to try to be like Jesus with others, huh? Fantastic.
Absolutely.
I love it, John. That's wonderful. What about school? We'll get to University of Rochester and Brooklyn Law a little bit later, but how were you in elementary and middle school? Did you take to it? Was it something that you enjoyed to do?
Yeah, I was blessed with really great teachers, and all throughout, had teachers who were inspiring and helpful. I was not the best, ironically, where I am today, I was not the best reader. And so, in third grade, I had some great reading teachers who, helped show that, even though I struggled in it, I could do it. Just it really had a great education and was given a lot of latitude to just do a lot of things, to play sports, to do music, to be involved in even theater I was sort of the quintessential jack of all trades and master of none. I wasn't an outstanding athlete by any means, but I was good enough to play. I wasn't outstanding in music, but I was good enough to play, and I loved it. I think it fostered a curiosity, which I continue to have.
Awesome. Any special teacher or a memory or a lesson that you learned from one of those teachers back then?
One of my, many, but to pick out one, Mr. Schiavone in the fourth grade.
It's amazing how we remember those names, isn't it?
I do. I remember.
You were 7, 8 years old,
Sure.
Man, amazing. Mr. Schiavone. What did he teach you?
Well, and it shows you the blessing that teachers can be.
Yeah.
Important. He ran his classroom, going back to my sister and joy and finding joy in life. He ran his classroom with joy, and he loved his students. He loved the kids.
Wow.
And he loved teaching. And so as an example, if you were late from coming back in from the playground, he wouldn't punish you. He actually set up a whole tribunal in the classroom. So you came in and you got a lawyer, and it was, the kid sitting next to you, and you got a prosecutor who was the other kid.
Somebody to defend you and
somebody to defend you. And then I was the judge, at times. And I remember, making decisions about, okay, well, you were 5 minutes late. So, and I know the excuse. Yeah, it wasn't quite that draconian, but it was, you got to wait 5 minutes to go out the next time.
Right.
But just taught valuable life lessons.
About that. Yeah. Fantastic. Great. Well, interestingly, you went on to a career in law. And as I said, we'll get to that in a minute. But University of Rochester, great school. Mm-hmm. You decided to study philosophy and history. What kind of led you there to that university in that field of study?
Mm-hmm. I really sort of picked what I liked. And I looked at class study, and I looked at the things that I wanted to do and where I was most interested. And said, wow, what coursework would be the most interesting? And it turned out that led to the major. It was really that kind of simple. Yeah, it's just whatever I was interested in.
Yeah. And you lived on campus, I presume, and did your 4 years there. Did you work as well? Mm-hmm. Was it, kind of part of your design with mom and dad that you had to support yourself going through college, or were you on a scholarship? Tell us a little bit about how you paid for it.
Sure. Well, I was, again, very blessed that my parents were able to afford to help me through. But I wound up working throughout. So there's medical department there. So I did everything from, I worked in the Department of Ophthalmology, stuffing envelopes and doing that kind of thing. I lifeguarded at the YMCA there and taught swim lessons. Really whatever could, wherever I could pick up work throughout, I did, and certainly did that over summers, painted houses and did internships and things like that. So
was swimming one of the sports that you enjoyed growing up as a kid and excelled at?
So no, actually, I always loved swimming and
got your lifeguard certification. I
did. And it was actually more ultimately it was the teaching of swimming that I liked. I liked the teaching aspect of it. And so became a, certified, water safety instructor. And then, in college wound up doing some work where I actually worked then at some programs for people with disabilities and taught swim lessons over, and there were legal reasons why you had to have those certifications, but that's what I really enjoyed about it.
Yeah, awesome. And first job out of college, I think there was a little bit of a gap before you went to Brooklyn Law School. Did you work for a year or two before you went to law school?
Yeah, I did. I did 2 years out. My first year, I worked at a big New York law firm as a paralegal.
Out of undergrad.
Out of undergrad, yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. So let's take a step back. What kind of interested you in law, or was it just took the job and then got the interest later?
It was sort of, again, I kind of just kept following what was fun to me.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed, in philosophy, I enjoyed logic. I enjoyed the argumentation part of it. I like the way that you put together a cohesive argument driven by reason. And, and that really felt like, law school and law ultimately was something I'd be interested in, which is what led me to that role.
Right. So you did that for a couple of years and then decided to go to law school.
Well, I actually did that for 1 year, and sort of quickly realized that law firm life is not for me.
Okay.
It's a brutal world in a lot of ways. And I remember one night where we had been doing, I don't know, I think we were there for 72 hours and hadn't slept much. And I wound up falling down the stairs because I was so tired. I just lost it and went right down the stairs. And I was like, I got to do something else. And so that was my wake up moment. And so, but what I wound up doing was I really wanted to learn another language. And so I was able to sort of find an internship with an investment bank in Germany, in Frankfurt.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So I went there for a year, and it was during the .com bubble.
Yeah.
So
late 99. Yeah.
Yep. 99. Yeah. And so we were trying to place online IPO shares there. And so I learned to speak German there. I learned to be more self-sufficient. And there was a lot of good lessons that came out of that.
That's cool. So had you had any German language training before going over to Frankfurt?
I knew I was going to do it about 6 months before, so that's when I started. But outside of that, I was very, very new.
Yeah, cool. So despite the law firm experience, you still decided to go to law school. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I kind of looked at law as the opportunity to serve, and thought about it it's the law can be used for good and bad, and
like anything.
No, absolutely. Right. And so I wanted to be one of the good ones and wanted to be somebody who tried to use that skill to help others, which eventually led me to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office.
Yeah, awesome. So out of law school, a couple of years there. What was that first job? Did you go back to a law firm right away? I know that you ended up at Fordham for a few years of teaching, but I think there was a little bit of time in between, no?
So when I graduated, my first job out of law school was at the DA's office.
Oh, it was the DA's office. Cool.
And then I became an adjunct. Actually, no, I didn't take a break.
Or did it at the same time?
I did it at the same time. So I taught a couple classes as an adjunct at Fordham for several years.
Yeah, fantastic. So what attracted you to the district attorney office? You spent the better part of 13, 14 years there, right?
Yeah. I really liked the notion of being able to do good in a particular case, and I think what was great about that office is that the mantra is you do the right thing no matter what that means. And that means that you do right by victims. It means you do right by defendants and defending their rights. And you have some really thorny moral, ethical, legal issues. But I really believe that the people who were there were trying to do the absolute best in very often very challenging situations. So I really loved it.
As we talked a couple of weeks ago, you ended up working in the sex crimes unit. You did some homicide work and ended up becoming chief of the Human Trafficking Responses Unit. Tell us a little bit about, was that kind of something you were assigned when you first came in, or you expressed an interest and then kind of took that on? Because you spent most of your career there doing that, correct?
Yeah, no, that's right. And so I guess I wasn't assigned. New York State actually didn't have an anti-trafficking law until 2007. So I started at the DA's office in 2003. And so, it was just, at that time, even though it seems so anachronistic now, we didn't even have the language. I wouldn't, if you'd asked me in 2004 or 5, what's human trafficking, I couldn't have defined it for you.
Yeah.
And so, but what we did see and what I saw was that there was just some things that were wrong. There were people who were being exploited, who were being both, sexually trafficked and labor trafficked. And the system itself was treating them in many respects like criminals, and wasn't recognizing the vulnerability and what led them to that place. So I actually had a lot of good mentors, a number of non-governmental organizations, NGOs and nonprofits who helped to, really educate me to say, hey, this is coming to you and somebody's being arrested for prostitution, but here's what's going on the back end. Here's where this person started and was kicked out of their home at 12 and had been first prostituted at 13. And you hear that, and okay, you may be dealing with a child now, or you may be dealing with a full grown adult, but the background was all the same, and it just changed the empathy. I wanted to learn more and wanted to do more. And so we worked with a group of people, a very good group of people who kind of felt similarly. And ultimately, a number of years later, after working these cases and understanding and getting better education on them, able to ultimately form a unit where I was then appointed the head to lead.
Oh, so that was actually formed under kind of your leadership there.
Yeah. And so I did, and obviously with the support of my boss and others, but I was ultimately founded it and was able to lead it with a very good group of people.
Is there progress being made in that area? I know you still hear so much about it, and it's just so sad because, as you said, the backstories, right, are so tragic. I heard a statistic the other day that I think it's something like tens of thousands of kids every year at the age of 18 get released from, the foster care program, right? Because they're adults now. And I think it's something like 50 or 60% end up incarcerated, and many of that, the women in particular, it happens because of they go into prostitution, et cetera. What's being done, or what progress is being made? Are you hopeful in that area? Have you seen progress, since that time that you first got involved in it?
Yeah. I'm actually very hopeful. And the fact that you're able to talk about those statistics and had heard of them is actually an incredible amount of progress. Because again, at 15 years ago, if you had asked me that question, I would have had no answer. I had no idea how big the problem was. So the education, has really been pretty outstanding. And so I think that's a big part of it is just an awareness that didn't exist 15 years ago. And, it's often compared to the domestic violence movement. And so, years ago, police response to a domestic violence was, okay, buddy, I'm going to take you and walk you around the block and then put you back in the house. And that's how they did it, and that was the common accepted wisdom. And
they're back the next day or the next week.
And so we didn't, we just didn't think of it in the right way. So I think the education piece of this has just been has really been important.
Developing the empathy of others. Yeah.
There is, and there's an empathy and if you even look at the language, right? The language of, okay, this person's a hooker, or this person's a prostitute. I've heard people say child prostitute. And if you think about, and you don't hear that as much anymore, but if you think about what that means, you're calling a 14-year-old a child prostitute because there was an exchange of money. But if that person was, you'd call it rape if there was no exchange for money. And so what we're really talking about is the serial rape of children.
Yes.
But there's nothing magic about the exchange of money. And so I think that's really, that education is real progress. There's a lot more to do, but ultimately it's vulnerability. And trafficking is the commoditization of vulnerability. So when somebody, the foster care was a great example because, it's traffickers are not necessarily preying on the people who have everything and have a lot of options. They're preying on people who
have none.
Who have none,
For the most part,
that this looks like a
or
good
that
option.
being the only option. Yeah,
Sure.
Wow. Well, how did you bring God in? You've walked a faithful life. You were brought up in a Christian home, Sunday school, Presbyterian Sunday school. We probably read some of the same books growing up. But what a tough area in which to really or maybe not. So talk to me a little bit about how you brought God into that job.
Yeah, I actually think it was easy in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
We are all deserving of God's grace as children of God. Yeah. And when you look at and you're working one-on-one with people, if you can start with that, then I think everything else falls into place.
Yeah. Did you have opportunities to talk about your faith as you would interact with a variety of different people? I mean, I'm sure particularly when you became chief of the department in the last 3 years you were there, you were talking to defenders, right? You were talking to people that were probably impacted directly by it, people that have been incarcerated, law enforcement. What did that look like? How did you, beyond living it yourself, right? Which I know you would. How did you bring God in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously it's a secular, governmental office, right. and so you have to be
not having prayer meetings in the district attorney's office.
Yeah, no, it's a little different than a Guidepost, but so you obviously have to be very mindful and considerate of other people's faith, but I do think it organically pops up again as in various ways where people were working through their own challenges, and a number of the survivors that we were working with were also working with faith-based organizations.
Right.
And again, those organizations are not proselytizing, but they would where someone showed an interest help strengthen their faith, and so I think I saw that a lot, and I think that just naturally happening because again, if you go back to the vulnerability of traffickers, a lot of that is around no one ever telling the person that they were loved. And when you then say, look, you're not only loved, but you're loved by your creator, and you're loved, you have inherent worth, you have inherent value, no matter what anybody else tells you. And that comes externally from not from me, not from anybody else, but from a much higher power.
Yeah.
I think that really, resonated.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, 14 years there, and then the big shift to become CEO of Guideposts. So 2 questions. First of all, for our audience who may or may not know what Guideposts is, give us a little bit of an overview of how the organization got started. It's got such an amazing history. You mentioned earlier that your dad was obviously CEO of it. You now became CEO. So tell us a little bit about the organization, then I'd love to hear how you made that shift.
Sure. Yeah. So Guideposts is a 75 or now 76-year-old spiritual well-being organization. So we harvest and try to utilize the power of hope and faith and prayer to drive spiritual well-being outcomes for people and ultimately make the world a more hopeful place. Right. And so we were founded in the 40s by Norman Vincent Peale, who was the author of The Power of Positive Thinking, as well as many other books. And he basically founded it after World War II because, like today, found that soldiers coming back and as the world was getting back to normalcy after World War II, they were seeing church membership go down. And so he wanted to basically use multimedia as it stood in the day to reach people where they were. And so he would go out he was the pastor of Marble Collegiate Church in Manhattan. And so he'd go out into the streets and just say, hey, tell me your story, and invite them into the church life. And
this was before he was famous, right?
Oh,
as he was, building up his ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say he sort of took that same thought process and said the best way to reach people is through storytelling, is through being able to recount the stories of people who have overcome through their faith, who have seen themselves as children of God, and ultimately understand that they weren't destined. We're all destined for greatness, and that takes many different forms. But the old expression, God don't make no junk, and that's why you should be. That's why you should be confident, and that's why you shouldn't worry, because God's got this. And so he went out and said, I'm going to use every channel I can to spread that message. And so he had a radio program. He, obviously spoke from the pulpit. He did events. He had and then ultimately formed Guideposts because he wanted to be able to get stories of sort of everyday people out there so that they would be able to find inspiration in them.
Fantastic. Well, kind of a previous day podcast, but in a different medium.
Absolutely. He'd be doing what you're doing right now.
What we're doing. doing. So Dad went to work for Norman Vincent Peale, right? He must have known him, worked in his organization. And then did he become CEO after Mr. Peale moved on, or how did that transition take place? And then yours?
Sure. So, so it was actually run by Dr. Peale and his wife,
Dr. Peale.
Mrs. Peale she was the chair of the board for a long time, and in all respects was really the business mind of how to make things operate. I mean, she was incredibly smart and savvy and understood process and operations and business. And so she actually ran the organization for a long time, with Dr. Peale. And my father worked there, and he was actually the first ever CEO of Guideposts. So as the Peale stepped back, he wound up becoming their first CEO, and she stayed on as chair of the board for many years after.
Wow. So kind of Dr. Peale was the outside, she was the inside.
Yeah.
He was the face of the organization, and she ran it. Yeah, that's a very effective combination. I worked for Walt Disney for a number of years, and people don't remember that Walt had a brother who really ran the whole operations, and Walt was kind of the front man, but he was behind the scenes. Yeah, very interesting success story. Wonderful. So, so second question. We got a couple. 14 years, New York County District Attorneys. You form the Human Trafficking Response Unit. You're obviously making good progress. You're teaching people how to talk and act about this, and then all of a sudden you make this big shift. Tell us what was going on in your mind. How did that come about, and that transition? Because you didn't take over directly from Dad, right? Was there someone else that was a CEO prior to you joining in?
There was. My father actually retired once. There was an interim CEO that came in and was there for about 5 or 6 years. And then my father came out of retirement for a couple of years. And as they were doing the new CEO search, that's when sort of I came up as a potential candidate.
Yeah. And tell us about kind of the thought process behind leaving behind, an incredible legacy and the work that you've done with the district attorney's office to making this shift. What kind of went through the thought process with that?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, my first thought process was, this seems like a crazy idea. I'm a district attorney. I'm a chief of a unit. I'm doing these things, and when I told people what I was thinking about doing, they said, "What are you doing?" And this is where mentorship really came in a big way. A lot of the work I had done at the DA's office was around digital transformation. Right. Victims of trafficking do not necessarily raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm a victim of trafficking." Right, and so, and also because of their vulnerability, it's very challenging to have them testify. So we had to figure out other ways to do it. And a lot of that was through data analysis and partnerships, bringing in data analytic professionals, bringing in coders who could help us analyze and figure out how we could uncover trafficking operations. And so a lot of it really was around digital transformation. And so, ultimately that's where, sort of my father as a mentor said, you have some skill sets here that we need as an organization. We're an organization in transition. We've done publishing as a channel, but we really need to go through a digital transformation to bring this hopeful, inspiring message to a wider array in the digital age. And, and so I wound up, and to be quite direct, I think a number of people said, this isn't really a good idea, board members and others, and we all kind of said it. And I went out to visit with a board member, who's the CEO of a big public company. He's been the CEO of many others, and, has done a lot of leadership development and mentorship. And I went into his office, and he started the conversation by saying, so what do you think? And I said, well, if I'm being honest, I think you're all crazy for talking to me. And so I spent the next hour, basically telling him, okay, here's what I can't do. Here's where I'm not an expert.
Right.
But here's what I've done, and here's where I think this, where this makes sense. And I fully thought I had talked myself out of the job, because I had
no idea how receptive they would be to that idea.
No, but I also thought, I want people to be clear about who I am, what I stand for, where I fit, and because I deeply care about the organization, irrespective of what position I was in, so I'd grown up in it in many respects, and so I didn't want to do anything that wouldn't be in the best interest of the organization, and I stood up, was shaking his hand. I said, thanks very much. And he basically said, no, you'll be great. Sit back down. Let's keep talking. and so we did. And then as I met other board members and we talked in the same way, I think we all came around. And, but I will say that, the day after I, left the DA's office, I had this moment of, what have I done?
A big inhale, right?
Yeah, a big inhale. And this is where you talk about, where God places the encouragement you need at the right time. I wound up talking to my good friend Ralph, who I've known, since I was a kid, and said, Ralph, what did I do? I was an expert in this field. I was doing this. And the next day, overnight came this copy of The Power of Positive Thinking, and it was all tattered and beaten up. And he
hadn't read it before.
I had read it before, but this was his copy that he had purchased in college that was all beaten up and tattered and worn. And he just put a little note in it that said, "You got this. You have everything you need." And I read it again, and the next day I said, "Okay, I'm going to do this."
Do it.
And it was the right place, right time, and definitely a God intervention.
And you talked about mentorship and how important that is, and how you never know where they're going to come from. It could be a dad, it could be a good friend. But what have you and God been talking about recently?
A lot. He's probably tired of me.
I don't think so.
We a lot. Particularly with the pandemic and making sure that our colleagues are safe, making sure our families are safe, making sure that we're doing right, and as we're making big decisions about the future of the organization, about future of our family, and just all the myriad of things that come with it. I have 3 young daughters, twins who are 13 and 11-year-old, and how do I ask frequently, how do I be a better leader? How do I be a better father? How do I be a better husband? How do I be a better son? How do I be a better brother? How do I be a better friend? And a
better CEO.
And a better CEO. Yeah. No, and that's a big one. But it's I think what the pandemic has taught us in a lot of respects is, we're only whole when all of those things are in alignment.
Right.
So that's my conversations.
How many employees today at Guideposts?
We have about 120 full time, and then there's another 30 or so that are sort of working with us on a regular basis.
Everybody in Connecticut, or are they multiple locations across the country or the world?
Actually, getting broader in terms of where we're reaching now. We're in mostly, we have about 70 or so people in Connecticut, another 35, 40 in New York, in the financial district, and an increasing number around the country. As we've been able to do it a little bit more remote, it's really opened up where we can recruit from.
And how many people do you touch with your messaging?
So we reach about 7 million through we have books, magazines, web presence, social handles. So we reach a fair number of people.
Is it mostly believers, or is it also, do you purposely try to reach non-believers?
Yeah, I mean, our message and actually the way Peel started this was, we're a Christian organization that wants to make the gospel and wants to make faith as accessible for people as it can be. Yeah. And so we are not political. We are not doctrinal and we don't preach any particular creed. And we're non-judgmental. So we basically say, come as you are. And that's kind of what a guidepost is, right? If you're walking along the road and you want to know, okay, I can take 2 paths. I can go down a path that is hopeful and positive and uplifting, or I can choose to be negative and just really not having the joy and gratitude that you should. A guidepost doesn't, kind of judge you from going down that path. It just stands there and says, okay, when you're ready to come back, we're here.
There's 2 arrows, right?
There's 2 arrows.
Or maybe more than that, right? Yeah. Fantastic. I love it. Well, John, we're just about out of time, but we always ask one last question to all our guests. And what kind of career and life advice would you give to someone that, perhaps like you, has had a couple of different decision-making, points or guideposts, perhaps along the career, to use the term. You discovered early on that you didn't really want to go into working in a law firm, but you went and got your law degree anyway. You built an incredible and very important organization within the district attorney's office, and now doing something entirely different. What would you tell someone that maybe is 10, 15 years younger than you, that might be encountering one of those forks in the road, and to make the decision, how to go about making those decisions about what to do next?
Yeah, I usually say 2 points. One is follow your curiosity. Being a listener, being able to just have a natural curiosity about things that you don't even think are important to you. If you just have that and follow it, it will actually take you places. And I think if you couple that with the knowledge that there are no bad decisions, right? We think we have all the control in this. We think our decisions that and people weigh decisions, and say, here are all the pros and cons, and you need to do that. I mean, you really do. Yeah. But if you don't make those decisions, you never know. And so one of the things I see a lot of people do, particularly earlier in their careers, is just worry them to death and just know God's in charge. Pray about it, think about it, but whatever decision you make, that's where you're meant to go. And you may have to correct it. You may have to do something later, but that's okay. And just give people the permission to really not worry that they're down a path that they can't get out of.
Yeah, follow their curiosity, because curiosity does lead to passion.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's important. Well, John Temple, CEO at Guideposts, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Right. Thanks so much, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.